Good morning, everybody. My name is Ken Goldberg. I'm a professor here in the College of Engineering and also the School of Information, and a proud member of the CITRIS research community. It is a pleasure to welcome you, and also our web viewers out there, to today's lecture. If you've been watching the news over the past 4 days, the situation is extremely volatile in Japan. There is a great need for technologies to advance our concerns about energy, but at the same time to protect us and to advance ways to respond to catastrophes such as we're seeing unfold. So the ideas for engineering and innovation are extremely, the need for engineering and innovation is as greater now as great now as it ever has been. So our topic today will be about innovation, specifically innovation at a little company you may have heard of called Google, and we're very fortunate to be welcoming one of their top researchers here to campus. Before I introduce him, I want to mention that we have a couple things that are going on with CITRIS. I want to also acknowledge Yvette Subramanian, who's standing in the back, and Aaron for their coordination of this series, for which otherwise it would not be possible. So thank you to both of you for that. You may not know, but there's probably 100 emails that have to go on before each one of these lectures to make them happen. Also, I want to mention that the Big Ideas competition is going to be, the poster session for that will be on April 14th. More information will be coming out soon. And on tomorrow at noon, we'll be having a lecture by Edward Seidel. It'll be a distinguished lecturer. Information is in the back, and it will be right here in this room. And on Friday, we'll have a speaker for the I4 Energy series. It will not be in this room. It will be at noon, but in room 250. The reason we're juggling things a little bit is because we have a special event in the next 2 days, which is the Berkeley Conference on Journalism and New Media. This is called Crossing Boundaries. Information is available in the back, but this is a very exciting first-time 2-day conference that we'll be hosting here in the CITRIS building starting tomorrow at 9 a.m. And the last thing I have to mention is that in terms of energy and sustainability and the environment, the lunch you're eating, everything from it can go into the compost except the aluminum. So be careful to take the aluminum and separate that out. And also the plastic bottles and cookie bags should go into the separate containers in the back. So we appreciate if you help us recycle those appropriately. Okay, so our speaker today, Dan Russell, did his undergraduate work at UC Irvine and then did his master's and PhDs in computer science at the University of Rochester. He also did work there at the on neuropsychology, and then went on to research positions at IBM, Apple, and Xerox PARC, where he led research groups and user experience studies. He was also an adjunct lecturer at the University of Santa Clara and at Stanford University. Some of his work at IBM is particularly well known as IBM's Blue Board system, which is a system, I think, precursor to Watson, which you all watched a few years ago. I won't say that it was provide the foundations for Watson, but there is an element of fundamental research that Watson builds upon, some of the ideas that Dan worked on. Today, Dan is a senior research scientist at Google Laboratories. He works in the area of search quality. His task is to particularly understand what makes users, like all of us, happy when we type requests into the browser. And one thing that he's known for and is particularly expert in is field studies. And like an anthropologist who goes to a remote environment, into the jungle, and studies the natives, in this case, we're the natives. So he goes into remote environments and studies people like us. And he tries to understand what makes users happy. He uses a number of techniques that he'll hopefully be touching on today. He does field work, lab studies, usability analysis, eye tracking experiments, logs analysis, etc. If you've used Google, how many of you have used Google in the past 24 hours? Okay, so you've benefited from Dan's work. So please join me in welcoming him today.
Thank you, Tim. So I've been at Google for around 6 years. And if you do the math, you'll realize that's post-IPO, so I'm not as smart as you make me out, Ken. It's been a really interesting time because, as Ken pointed out, Google is one of these places where we constantly are changing what it is we're doing, what we're about, and the ways in which we achieve those goals. My job is to really, as Ken suggested, go out and watch what makes people happy, and frequently that's watching what makes people unhappy and trying to learn from that. So that's a little bit about what I'll talk about today. But I also want to talk about how Google takes that kind of information and reforms itself, transforms itself. So let me start off with what I think innovation is, right? There is the kind of conceptual conceit that innovation are two guys in a garage that come up with a brilliant idea and they go off and implement it in a weekend and bang, you've got a whole new industry. The truth is, it's really much more like dinosaurs evolving into, well, they didn't evolve into anything, but it's much more like an evolutionary model where we've got stuff at the beginning of design process, you see stuff at the end, and the innovation sometimes is you forget all the stuff in between. So it looks radical, but when we talk about, for example, the innovation of personal computer, people often say, well, there was the Xerox Alta, which was fantastic, and then there was the Macintosh. The truth was there was also Lisa. Anybody have a Lisa? No, nobody remembers the Lisa.
It was great. It was a great machine.
It was a fantastic machine, absolutely right. But it laid the groundwork for Macintosh. And almost all radical innovations like that are in fact based on the evolution of prior technology. We don't think about, for example, that Google was actually predated by several other search engines. Right? Google was not the first search engine, no matter what your grandparents told you. Right? Our environment is an interesting one because we have a whole ton of stuff. A lot of different products, a lot of different kinds of ways of looking at the web, looking at the ecosystem, everything from handheld devices, search on mobiles, the actual platform itself, through things like Orkut, something that predates Facebook, maps, which were predated by other map servers. And you see, we actually have this huge ecosystem, including this one, where when we bought YouTube, I'm not sure I would have predicted where we would be today. Right? Think about this, right? People are uploading to YouTube 24 hours of content roughly every 3 minutes. When we bought YouTube, I would not have predicted that. Right? I would not have predicted that radical rate, or the social enterprise, the groups, the discussions, the invention, the use of real-time streaming YouTube, the use of YouTube to make and break careers. Justin Bieber, brought to you by YouTube. You're welcome. We also have a few other products you might have heard about. Google Video. Does anybody use Google Video? Raise your hand. Only 4 of you. Okay. Let me tell you something that most people don't know. Google Video is a superset of YouTube. Right? That means you can find all the YouTube videos through Google Video and a lot of other stuff. So if you're doing something for completeness, you might want to consider using that. How about Google Books? How many people have used Google Books? Raise your hand. Okay. I'm in Berkeley. What do I expect? Of course, you're all scholars. Usually when I ask that question in more pedestrian audiences, I'm lucky if I get 5%. How many people have used Google Earth? Okay. Oh, okay. Again, a literate audience, which is good to see. Now, Earth is an interesting case because this was an innovation where we acquired the company. In this case, we acquired Keyhole. And then we worked with them to bring this sort of massive platform to the rest of the world. From my perspective as a user experience designer, as a user experience researcher, part of the question is, how do you actually take this thing, this planet-wide database of images, and allow people to, for example, move to that perspective? What is the natural / intuitive UI interface for that, toward doing that tip down, right? If you're a pilot, you might understand the motion of a joystick, but a lot of people have no clue what that is. So from our perspective as trying to drive innovative research, we need to figure out, well, what our technology can do, what the underlying substrate can support, and how do we map that to some easy-to-understand user interface. That's sort of the design challenge for us. These challenges are manifest in lots of ways. Has anybody used Google goggles here? A couple people? Okay. Well, it runs on this device, or whatever device you might happen to have. And it probably is easiest if I just show you a little example here. I'll show you a little video. I did this at Stanford campus, and I'm sorry, Berkeley, but you know, it works here too. So I did this middle of last year. I've got my device, and I'm going to take a picture of Hoover Tower. And what it's doing is an image query. Okay? Ignore all the language around Google goggles as, you know, sort of avatar of Lord Krishna. But it's actually this thing that just does a kind of search against image space. And you can see here, it found Hoover Tower and linked us to the website. Right? Fantastic. We now have a new way of doing queries. Right? You might not have thought about it as an image query mechanism, but it's a little bit like TinEye, one of those mechanisms. Right? There are other kinds of interface devices we've been designing, which look a little bit like radical innovations, but again, are based on this evolutionary model. Voice reco has been around for a long time. People at IBM have been working on it for lifetimes. Okay? And little by little, generation by generation, it's improved to the point where I can whip out my phone in a crowded bar and say, give me directions to the next bar, wherever it is I need to go. And it kind of works. It works pretty well. And then it will talk back to me and give me text directions by speaking them aloud. So this is a new kind of query as well. The geolocated, spatially aware, directionally enabled voice interface. Okay. So one of the things I really study is how do people ask questions? How do they think about using Google? You can use imagery to search Google image database. You can ask questions using voice. You can get directions. But let me tell you a story. So my son loves basketball. He's 14. And, well, let me just play you the song here. You've probably heard this song at your local sporting event. You heard this before? Okay. How many of you know what it is? One person. Excellent. Now, you know what happens. Sorry. Stop. That UI thing just kills me. He said, Dad, I really want that for my iPod. How do I get it? And you know what the lyrics are, right? Ooh. So Shazam isn't going to work because it works on pre-recorded data set, right? And so you can't hold up your phone to a crowd of rabid Stanford basketball fans and hope to get that answer. And so I, as a representative of the search engineering culture at Google, said, you're screwed. There's no way to find this. And so he, you know, being like any good 14-year-old, immediately went to the laptop and ignored my advice and typed in, ooh, 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 ooh. You see the first suggestion? It's actually the right song. I didn't know that that was a reasonable query because I knew too much. Right? I knew too much. What that means is I was functionally fixated in the language of psychologists. I had a notion of how this device, how this tool called Google Search was working. And I didn't think about what? I didn't think about all the millions of people out there writing answers to questions on QA sites. One of which is, what is the song that goes ooh, 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 ooh? Right? So I was restricted in my model, in my mental conception of what Google was. Now, he was lucky. Well, you know, tell you the truth, it's now a strategy. We used to say 3 years ago, if you're going to do a Google search, use few words, like 2 or 3, and as necessary, revise. Now, if you're asking a culturally situated question like, what's that song? it makes a lot of sense to just type in a query, type in a question, and go for it. Chances are really pretty good that someone will have answered the question, how tall is Madonna? And there will be a site that will be indexed by Google. So this is now a strategy. Now, we didn't actually change anything in the search engine. It's an innovation because the underlying data changed. There are these QA sites that are all over. And in fact, English is rather impoverished in this. In China and Korean, Chinese and Korean and Japanese, there are tons of QA sites. So there's an interesting kind of phenomenon where the tool gets better because the rest of the world got better. Right? So innovation is not necessarily because you improve the technology, because you shipped more code faster, more efficiently than your competitor, but in our case, because the underlying ecosystem changed. Okay. Now, when we study search and the way people search, we know there are these effects, these priming effects, these queuing effects, and these fixedness effects, like the ones I just mentioned. So in what ways do these psychology effects, these biases, play in the way people approach search? Well, I'll give you a quick example here. We know that if I ask a question like this, that is there an abandoned city in the water of San Francisco Bay? Does anybody know the answer? Raise your hand. Yes, no? Okay. Few people know. Okay. It turns out, I will give you the answer. Actually, there is one. But it turns out if you ask several hundred people, the A version, sorry? Drawbridge. It is called drawbridge. Yeah. But if you ask people the A version of that question, it takes them much longer, and they're much more likely to get it wrong. And they're less satisfied with the search experience. With a search experience. So wait. The experience of using the tool is predicated partly on the way I ask the question. Right? If I give you version B, you find the answer quickly, and you're very happy. And in fact, it is called drawbridge. And it's a remnant catwalk out there. Okay? If you use the query Ghost Town San Francisco Bay, you find the answer almost instantly. In fact, it takes about 2 minutes less time on average. And your satisfaction score. Look at the difference in satisfaction. The satisfaction on the A form of the question is very low. People are really unhappy. They're pissed off because you asked them that question. If I give you that version of the same question, right, it's just a synonym shift. Right? You should be able to handle that because you're all cognitive, literate people. But in fact, it's quite hard to do.
Are you going to talk about that metric? Satisfaction?
What, satisfaction? Yeah. I could. I wasn't planning on. In this case, it's just a post-question evaluation, 1 to 7. How satisfied are you? Right. But when you run several thousand of these kinds of things, we start to see the patterns, right? And on an average, well, this is a funny, slightly different version of that metric, but we use this kind of measure a lot. And we'll come back to measures in just a little bit. Okay. So there's a bunch of stuff we can do to innovate. We can change the tool. We can change the data. Or the thing I'm most interested in these days is how can we improve the searcher? How can we make you a better searcher? What can I tell you that'll make your life better? What can I tell you that'll make you 25% more efficient and 0.2 happier? If I can do that, I will have earned my money. Knowing how to search, though, is an interesting, rich skill. It's an interesting and rich experience. And you use all kinds of information about the world, about the web, that you already know. That's kind of tacit or implicit in your awareness. So you may not be knowing of the kind of depth of knowledge you already have. So let me show you a little clip of video. This is a field study, rather a lab study we ran, where this is a fragment of an eye tracking video. So the pink dot is that person's eye. What I want you to listen to is what he talks about. Now his task here is to find something to do on Saturday night. Let me run this video and let you watch.
So,
Yeah, I want to try one last thing.
Okay.
Activity thing.
okay.
I'll see what happens. I'm activities for kids. Oh, see? They're not giving me a chance, man. They're always for kids. No wonder I couldn't find. So we should type adult.
Okay.
Activities. See? That's what I mean. So it's really hard to search for these activities.
So let me ask you a question. Why did you laugh? It's interesting because he didn't laugh. He doesn't know there are terrible areas of the net that you probably don't want to expose when you're a lab subject in a lab at Google, right? He's just a little bit naive about this, right? So he asks what seems to be a plausible question. And I'll tell you the next question he framed, his next query was, adult activity in San Francisco Saturday night. I cut the tape before that. So he doesn't know that there are dragons in part of the information sea that Google will happily expose to you, right? But you know. You already know that stuff. That this is probably a not safe for work kind of query. But let me switch that question now to you. Do you know we index and serve up all these different kinds of content? You know at web pages and news, patents, images, do you know we have 3D models that you can search for on the web using Google? Scholarly papers you already know about? How about magazines from the 1950s? You want a picture of the cover of Popular Science from November 1955? Google has it, right? So there's a bunch of stuff out there. I'll give you an example. Here I'm doing a search for 3D Warehouse, which is our repository for 3D SketchUp models. You can go and create these things. In this case, you can now go to that repository, that index, and search for them. Here I've searched for Notre Dame, the cathedral. I click on it, you can see the rendering of it. I'm going to download the model the way you would click through on a web page if it were a web link. I download the model, I switch over to my SketchUp viewer, and now I've got Notre Dame on my desktop. Okay? You want to know what a flying buttress is? Download it. Go fly right up to it, look through the rose window, see what's there. Now, how many of you knew before this talk that we had three-dimensional models you could search for? Okay? You're all geo guys, right? Okay, most people don't have any clue that we have these things. Pretty high res, pretty nice thing. If you're a sixth grader in, say, Des Moines, Iowa, and you're trying to learn about medieval architecture, man, this is the ticket. This is the thing you really want. Okay? How about public data? We have a ton of public data. A lot of it's from UN, a lot of it's from state. Here, for example, is the unemployment history for the past several years in Santa Clara County. You get that by searching for, are you ready? Unemployment rate, Santa Clara County. You can then do compare and contrast by using our visual tool, which runs in the browser. You can now see Santa Clara versus Imperial County. And you can naturally ask, why is Imperial County so different? It's very agricultural. Okay? So what you're seeing is the rise and fall of crops, and unemployment follows along with that. Okay? So public data, three-dimensional models, magazines, et cetera, et cetera. The interesting question for you, as literate consumers of search, is so what's not indexed? What can I search for? I used to ask people that question. What kinds of things can you find on Google? And the common answer is, I can find anything. No. That's not right. Right? A, it's categorically not true. But more interestingly, what you know helps you frame what you can ask. See what I mean? If you don't know that three-dimensional models are even conceivable as a result of search, you will never think to ask for that in search. Few exceptions, but mostly, if you can't frame a question, you will never think to use Google to find the answer. So what this means, really, is that on top of all the innovation we're producing, all the novel results and the novel visualizations, all the interesting new things we're adding, we have to also bring along the culture in terms of its underlying search information literacy. So, for example, we know that people look at, and I know through eye tracking studies, they scan the search results page. Right? How they understand those search results is critical to their success. Right? So what strategies do they use in searching through a page? I'll give you an example. If I did this query, New York State Library Auction Catalog Rentals, this is actually drawn from one of my field studies. This is a query that someone did. And they landed on a page that looks like this. And it's a gigantic page. It's roughly 140 pages long, screenfuls, right? Now, this person was looking for a particular work by a particular person. What would you do? If you want to find what is, I think the word is Reynolds, right? How would you find the word Reynolds in this long document? Any guesses? Use find. Use Control F, okay? You would use Control F to find it, skip to that point in the document, bang, you're there. Now imagine you don't know Control F, right? It would change the way you read. It would change the way you understand information. It would change the way you ask questions. Let me tell you something. We ran recently, we ran a whole ton of experiments, and it doesn't sort of matter what they are. We ran 17 of them. And the farther to the left that green dot is, the better the human performance is. That one at the bottom that says Dan's Control F represents roughly a 12% improvement in the amount of time, decrease in the amount of time it takes to find the answer. It was by teaching with a 30-second video how to use Control F. Okay? This was over the population of raters, the people we employ to do searches for us every day. Well, think Mechanical Turkers, except actually really employed. Right? These are people who do searches basically 8 hours a day. We gave them a 30-second video, made them 12% better. Okay? Minus 12% time to result. Okay? That's a phenomenal result. Among other things, it's now required training for everybody who's going to be a rater for Google, because it saves us roughly $1 million a year. Okay. So let me tell you something I did. So I discovered this while doing a field study down in LA. So I was interviewing a bus driver who ended up on that page, actually, that I just showed you. And she's going through it line by line by line. And it's one of those cases where after a few minutes you want to just, strangle yourself. And I said, is there any other way you could find this information? She says, no! What do you think I'm doing? I'm trying to find it. I said, yes, find it. Anyway, it became clear she had no clue how to do edit, find, search, Control F, Command F. Right? So I surveyed 2,200 people in person. Actually, and I asked them various forms of this question. 90% of all internet users in the United States do not know how to find a word on a page. Okay? 50% of all teachers don't know how to find a word on a page. I'm excluding university. This is K-12. Okay? They read the internet differently than you do. When you land on a login page, you say, boom, Control F, you're done. Right? They go through it line by line. Okay? I've asked several people who do this as their modus operandi, how do you actually survive? I say it nicely. But how do you actually find, what if you do a search and land on a page and then you don't find the word you're looking for? Oh, I read it again. They cannot confirm the negative presence, the absence of something, right? If that word is not on the page, they have to read it again and read it again until they convince themselves that the word is not there. So you now read the internet differently than people who don't know this. Let me give you another example. Another kind of search skill, reading literacy. Something I call anti-reading. Now, you're all, again, in the culture of scholarship. So when you scan a result like this and you see maquette, that first word there, those highlighted words, and you don't know what it is, most of you will click through or look it up or something, right? There's a huge population out there, when they see a word like that, blip, they're gone. They don't know what to do with it. Okay? By definition, if you're in this room, you are a high need for cognition personality type. You need to understand these things. This is not representative. Let me give you a deep insight. You are not statistically significant. You're all outliers, that's right. So what you end up doing is learning how to anti-read. That is, word spotting for words you don't know. Okay? That's what I call anti-reading. And here we have a tool in the Google toolbar where you can turn this highlighting feature on, and it will nicely highlight all the words in the search query with different colors. If you're trying to learn, this is a fundamental skill. This is what you have, one of the new literacies you have to have. Okay? How many people know that Google offers translated search? So you can do a search in one language. Excellent, excellent. I love talking to literate audiences. Okay? This means you can search for terms in another language. So for example, I could, this is one of my favorite examples. This is a J-pop singer I happen to like. So I typed in her name, Tsuji Ayano. I misspelled it, and it gave me the spell correction in English. Think about what it did. It converted to Japanese and said, oh, that's not what you mean. You must mean this, and converted it back to English for me. That's the correct spelling of the name. Right? Here's another one. Tel Aviv, not a city I know anything about, but it spell corrects and then gives me the Hebrew on the right-hand side. So I go to that page, I do click through, and now I can read, masameno, that language by just rolling over the text. Right? So we now have another way to read. You're in the 7th grade, you want to understand how the Greeks feel about dolphins? Don't search in English, search in Greek. Okay? So we have a ton of different kinds of content. Part of the innovation of Google is allowing all that content to be surfaced. I think it was 2 years ago now, we started surfacing lots of different kinds of results in the search page. It used to be, do you remember? Remember 4 years ago when you did a web search, all you got were web results. Now you get news, now you get images, you get maps, you get all kinds of stuff. That was an innovation that almost nobody noticed, but it took us a lot of time because we're blending multiple corpora together. The indices have to be ranked and ordered so that a news result about, say, a big wave in Japan can get merged in on the results of the search results page. Because remember, you said search the web. But we know that you really want to see news because it's really important. So we had to figure out how to blend all those different kinds of corpora together. But we now have so many different kinds of corpora that it's not possible to blend. For example, if you do a search for Notre Dame, we're not going to surface 3D models of Notre Dame. We have too much stuff. So we have to do pick and choosing. That's what ranking algorithms are all for. So a huge amount of covert innovation happens because we do subtle changes to ranking that you see, but you may not be aware of. And in some sense, that's our gold standard. We can change human behavior, change your search behaviors, change your understanding of the world, and you don't even notice. You just use it. Continue using it. So, to talk about the culture of Google for a little bit, I'm not going to talk about the Google of the good old days from 2000, right, pre-IPO days. Let me just give you a little bit of insight about what it's like now. Google is really a culture where innovation is expected. It's one of those things where it has to happen. It has to happen consistently, where failing is okay, and it's fun. It's good to be playful. Have fun with it. I'll give you examples of each of this. So, just in search, this is not. Well, I guess this is really Google-wide. We have roughly 5 fairly major product launches a week. So every Friday in the TGIF meeting, Sergey or Larry stands up on stage and says, hey, we launched this, we launched this, we launched this, and there's about 5 of them every week. Okay? Not a whole lot of companies change everything five times a week. So it's one of those things where the pace is expected to be fast. Interesting thing about that is now it establishes a cultural expectation. Your project is coming on, you've got to get it out and shipped in a relatively small amount of time. It's no use to plan something 2 years out because as we see with the web changing constantly underneath us, if you plan something and it takes the glacial amount of time of 24 months, the world will have changed a couple of times. We really do live at internet speed. So change is constant here. It's constant because the underlying web content changes, our indexing system change. People are searching for new things. So their expectations change, partly as a result of us shipping new kinds of capabilities, new kinds of corpora, but also because we live in an ecosystem where we have competition. Bleco comes online, and now people want to be able to do those kinds of searches. Bing has a new search, we need new capability, we need to be able to do that as well. So for example, real-time updates. With the rise of Twitter, we wanted to be able to offer that. So now we have real-time search updates. So when you tweet, it takes about 4 or 5 seconds before that tweet gets indexed and shoved into search results. So we can offer real-time updates, which is really nice when things like tsunamis happen. You do hash tsunami, go to real-time search in Google, boom. Okay? There, the innovation was driven by the environment. That was a new kind of data that we needed to track. We needed to give you the capability of getting access to it. Let me give you an example of how maps has changed over the past 2 years. Now, I'm going to show you a kind of a time lapse of maps. Okay? This is about 2006, early 2006. Notice the layout, the organization, the colors, the names. I'm going to go 2006. Notice that all the ads, all the location businesses are on the right-hand side. A year later, they're on the left-hand side. They have a little bit more information. It's now called local. It was called maps in 2006. Now it's called local. And the pin has a lot more information on it in particular. 2008, we now have iconography with each of those results. We have different kinds of UI interaction devices. A year later, it's changed the logo. We've changed the blue color. Did any of you notice this? No, you did not notice this. We make major changes to the UI, and the only way to see it is by time-lapsing it. Total success, right? Total success. Except that we measure how you click through and everything, you as an aggregate. Right? And we know that some of those changes we make, some work and some don't work. 2010, we've now got a whole pile of new things. So here, let's put them all side by side. There's 4 years of it. We changed the name, we changed the color, we changed the UI logo, we changed the underlying data. In 2004, 2005, we were buying data for the whole maps universe. But I believe it was late 2009, because of all the cars running around, they were all instrumented with GPS and dead reckoning systems. We switched to a totally generated, Google-generated data set for all the maps. Nobody noticed. That's okay. It's okay. It means we're winning. That's great. Okay? So when we do these UI changes, when we're trying to innovate these things, we want them to both be, in some cases, very noticeable and very big. For example, when we launched instant search. In most cases, though, we want them to be invisible and just continuously useful. However, we make mistakes. So, for example, what do you notice on this map? This is UC San Diego, right? From a couple years ago. Anybody notice that little blue triangle there? Right here? We know you didn't notice it. Nobody clicked on it. Less than 0.1% of all people ever clicked on that. It actually just slid the panel to the left. It was great. Nobody clicked on that widget in the bottom right. This thing, right? That expands and contracts the map. And absolutely nobody used this sort of God's eye map viewer so you could move the rectangle around on the local map. Okay, so there's two things going on here. One of which is we need to up our game with respect to UI design, and we're constantly doing that by the mechanism of instrumentation and measurement. That's what all the analytics are for, right? But on the other hand, there's this interesting question about how much should you, as a skilled user, bring to the table? If you don't know we do patents, you'll never think to do a patent search. If you don't know that we have, for example, topo maps, how many people know we have topo maps in maps? Okay. How many of you know we have an Earth plugin for maps? Okay, great. We have all this capability. And to some extent, it's a two-body problem. We can give you immense power. We can put the planet on your desktop. But if you don't know what's in that planet, you're stuck. So this is constantly an interesting design problem for us. And let me give you a story here about instant previews. How many of you have used instant preview? You know what I mean? Where you click on it, you see the preview of the document? Okay. Okay, so here was the observation. Really, two observations. We saw a lot of people going to the search results page, clicking through to the landing page, and then going, oh, that's not it, back. And then clicking through and going, that's not it, back. All right? Anytime you see repeated code like that, what do you want to do? You want to optimize it, right? From a compiler perspective, right? So we want to do that to help people because we know even improving the response time by 100 milliseconds, 100 milliseconds, give me a break, 1/10 of a second, it increases people's satisfaction scores. Not obvious. I didn't believe that result when I first read it. And then I ran some more experiments, and it's absolutely true. As little as 100 milliseconds makes a perceptual difference. What's fascinating is it's actually not conscious, but the scores go up. Fantastic. Right? Second thing, as we saw with the Control F example, people go to the page and then can't find what they're looking for. So what do we do about that? Well, here was a demo from March, about a year ago now, of the very first mock-up of Instant Preview. So you can see here, there's the results page for annular tear, and we sort of give you a preview of the document on the right-hand side. We then iterate. This is classic design practice. You do another mock-up, do another trial, another test, keep going, keep going, keep going, right? There are another 10. I'm not going to bother to show you. Okay? And we end up with this. Okay? Now, here's the cool thing. This is the very first one, and this is what's shipped, right? Very, very similar. Turned out, the very first one, we got lucky this time. And we did a whole bunch of interstitial sort of iterations in order to figure out what was working and what was not working. Right? So, innovation is expected, right? One of the important things to do is not only continuously innovate by shipping new products, new capabilities, but also to realize that not invented here is fatal. It's totally fatal in our business. We live in the internet, right, where consumer loyalty is essentially nil. It takes one click to switch to a competitor. So we recognize that good ideas come from everywhere. Internal, external, bottom-up, top-down. So, for example, we got a message from one of our users saying, I looked and looked and looked, and I could not find the phone number for the local poison control. And my daughter was in the hospital for a couple of days. Could you please fix this? We said, yeah, that's a good idea. So now when you type poison control, you get the phone number for your area, okay? Or 800 number. We added a bunch of medical stuff like this because people kept typing in things like IBS and getting, you know, three-letter acronym for companies and so on. We trigger things like earthquakes. We then add stuff like this. A lot of this is all bottoms up, right? People say, why did you have a person finder for people in disaster areas? That's a good idea. We know how to do databases. We can build that. And so in the Japanese case, the guys in Tokyo built it essentially overnight. Now, as part of the culture of innovation, we have to recognize that it can happen sort of everywhere. Internally, externally, people walking around. And so we try to build an environment that supports play, it supports easy interaction between people. So for example, when I was at IBM, I had a great office. I had a big office with like 50 linear feet of bookshelves, very academic. I had a secretary who was in the anteroom to get to my office. You had to go through her office, right? Does that sound like IBM to you? Now I'm in an office with 4 other guys, and that's standard. I've been there 5 years. I've had 5 different offices. That's actually low. Most people move probably about every 6 months. Very flexible, a lot of interaction between people, and it actually, I initially hated it, and I was completely wrong. It actually really worked well. So we support the thin wall model, right? Idea hybridization, because I'm actually in an office with guys who work on ranking, and I don't work on ranking, and I'll be damned. You know, we learn stuff from each other all the time. All the time. So we try to support this notion from Stephen Johnson called the adjacent possible by allowing people to expose the next possible states for each of their pieces of work. I learned from my office mate about ranking and what's possible and what's not. What's actually in the data structure that describes a web document? Now I know. I never would have found out otherwise. We also have a huge, very active internal education and seminar series. So for example, today I think there are a dozen different talks going on today inside of Google. So it's very much like a graduate school. In fact, the number one comment from most people when they join Google is, it's more like graduate school than graduate school. And it's kind of true. We also recognize that acquisition of companies is a great way to both bring in ideas and people. Sometimes we want the people, sometimes we want the ideas, sometimes, most often we want both, right? I don't actually know what the total count is over the past 5 years, but it's a lot. Okay, so we acquired Deja 2001. That's how we got NetNews. That formed the basis for Google Groups. Pyra became Blogger. Urchin became Analytics. Keyhole became Earth. And YouTube was an acquisition. Android was acquisition. All of these things. We can't do it all ourselves. We're really good hackers, really good developers, but, you know, frankly, the world is big. And we need to acquire these companies. And so it's an interesting way of thinking about innovative research as being outsourced to companies that are willing to take on the risk for initial development. So they take all the risk, and then we say, hey, come join us. It's a great model for this. We also have a culture where failure is okay. In fact, if you're not failing, if you're not doing something where people don't understand it, where it didn't ship quite right, then you're probably not pushing the boundaries. And we constantly want to push the boundaries. That's another part of the zeitgeist of Google. Push the boundaries. Be great. Larry, in almost all of the product reviews, says, can't we do this for the entire universe? I know you're going after North America, but think about Europe. Think about China. Think about Africa. How can we up the scale? So it's an important characteristic that we recognize when things go wrong, and we learn from that, and we try to learn as a culture. Example, there was a problem last year. There was a big system front-end, back-end failure where there were non-coordinated pushes of code. Huge amounts of internal problems. I don't think anybody outside actually knew about this. But the guy who messed it up, he sent an email basically to everybody in the company saying, this is what happened, this is what I did wrong, here's how to avoid the problem in the future. Everybody learned. Right? Not many cultures support that. He got a promotion this year, so it actually worked out really well for him. Point is, if you learn as a culture, then the whole system gets brought up. Everybody can now perform at a better level, higher level. As you know, we're also a playful culture. Now, that's good for the psychology of the people working there, but it also allows a little bit of free time. There's the 20% time, the 20% projects you've probably heard about, which lead people who are lounging around in brightly colored offices, reading books on topics not directly related, to sliding down between different floors in one of our buildings. It also leads to things like this. Google News was started because Krishna Bharat was playing around with this idea that he wanted to aggregate news in a single web page. Okay? He did it as a 20% project, and it's now one of our major pieces of content. So it's a fascinating kind of place where play can become work and work can become play. And then this extension to news is called Fast Flip. It basically emulates the flipping physical papers, the way you would normally flip pages between a newspaper. Again, a playful kind of interface that turns out to be very, very cool. I know you just had lunch, but one of the great things about Google is we have this great, rich, internal ecosystem for feeding ourselves. And yes, we have good food, but also, as important, we also have this wonderful ecosystem of people teaching each other. So yes, we have seminars for people outside. Ken comes and gives a seminar at Google. But we also have many, many people within teaching each other. We recognize that the people at Google are really special. They're very high quality. And so we have classes in capoeira. We have things on system profiling, benchmarking, unit testing. I teach how to search. I know that sounds really weird, right? But I have actually 7 different classes I teach at Google to teach Googlers how to search, including my favorite, advanced search for search engineers. The last people you think in the world who would need to know how to search. So the bottom line for this is the innovation culture of Google is really that we expect innovation, we live on it, we depend on it. It comes about not only from technology pushes, but also from underlying ecosystem changes. It can happen. Failure's okay. Take care of yourself. Take care of your culture. So we're very conscious about the culture. We have an executive who is the chief culture officer. Right? So the maxims, I think, that I derive from our culture are that evolution is not just a nice thing. It's actually required. It has to happen fairly quickly. The consequence of that is evolution is driven by being very, very pragmatic. You have to build systems without an ego. I know the system doesn't have an ego, but you do. So you have to be willing to let go of your beautiful design idea that you spent 5 weeks working on and just say, nope, it didn't work. A lot of this is driven by analytics, by testing. And I cannot tell you how many times I've done a UI, done a system, done a something, put it out there in the world, and watched it crash and burn. Okay? Once it crashes and burns, be pragmatic, change things. Measure that stuff. We also measure our organizations. So you probably heard about Project Oxygen, which is our internal HR metrics. How well do managers work? How well does culture work? How well do project teams work? And what can we learn? What can we, the culture, learn in order to make us more efficient, more effective, and happier as a culture? It's important when you're being evolutionarily pragmatic to be very lightweight. That's part of the reason why it's, I think, a good thing to have moved 5 times in 5 years. I've been at places, I've been at research places where I've literally seen people in the same office for 30 years. The same office. That is a little stultifying, you know? Get out, recirculate, learn new stuff. It's a different world. And finally, admit when things are not working and de-staff them. Don't keep them on perpetual life support. Keep those things moving. My big upshot from all this is that culture hacking, maintaining our infrastructure, maintaining our system, maintaining the way we do work, can have far more impact than all of the individual things we do, because that's the ecosystem, that's the ecology that generates all of that stuff. Thanks very much. We have time for a few questions, and she's got the microphone. Any questions? Oh, thank you. Or plain comments are fine too.
There's one problem that
Only one?
that I've always tried to solve, and you're very close to it, but you still can't. I still can't get it from you from Google. Is what a picture of the magazine cover of a fashion magazine that had a president on the cover in the 40s, and it won't be able to solve. It can't come up with the cover of that magazine. And so that's the level you should be shooting for. So there's a president who was a cover of a fashion magazine. If you put that in, it still can't derive. It gets the president, but it doesn't define the fashion magazine.
Yeah, no, I understand. The good news is we're constantly making image retrieval better, which is great. Doing presidents on fashion magazines, that's tough, I agree.
Because it's natural language processing. If you put in the names and everything, you might be able to get a site. But the idea is that that's...
I can imagine doing that. I actually can, but not today. You're absolutely right. Okay.
So
Before we go to that question,
I have a question.
There's a question from the sky. Oh, okay, hang on one second. I would be remiss if I didn't say we're hiring. And so if you're graduating soon, come talk to me afterwards. I'd like to talk to you. Okay, yes, question.
So you talked about a lot of data that Google indexes that people may not know about, but I have the other kind of example in what I work on, which is genomics. I think Google if I just take a long stretch of DNA from the human genome, Google is not good at finding that. So I'm wondering whether you guys are working on this and what you can say about that.
Alas, if we were working on it, I couldn't say. I mean,
Fair enough.
yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting problem because lots of technical fields have data like that, meaning large and very detailed and very structured in interesting ways. But it doesn't have a huge user population, and we can't sell an ad against it.
Not yet.
You know, it's tough. We still have to make money at the end of the day. But having said that, we're constantly adding new corpora, so we'll see what happens. Next question.
So how resilient do you find people are with their searches? Like if they don't find it the first time, do they try again? And do they try mixing stuff up? And how much do they keep up to find what they want?
You know The Long Tail book by Chris Anderson? That's the profile of all of the aggregate searches in aggregate with respect to number of queries or amount of time. It's all like this. Okay? So the average query length, session query length, is about 2 queries. Okay? On average. But it's one of those curves, so be careful. People who are very motivated are out in the tail. They will refine and refine and refine and refine. Typically, when people go past the 4th revision of their query, they're in bad trouble. We actually think of those as bad sessions because they're not getting to where they want to be. So, in particular, for certain topics like medical, financial, travel, things like that, people will revise. But typically, most questions are answered within 1 or 2 queries. So it's an interesting question because those long tail queries, which have the longer sessions, often are really valuable or critical, like medical queries. Yep, we're back.
Okay, I'm one of those persistent and frequent searchers, and sometimes Google will tell me that it doesn't believe I'm human, and I have to either prove that I'm human or it will lock me out. And it's often when I'm doing like a number range or something. How can I avoid that?
How do I know you're human? This is a really interesting point. We're trying to debug this right now because it seems to be triggering more than it should be. And it seems to be triggering when people do advanced operator searches like number range search. If I will tell you, I'll give you my email address afterwards. No, you should be able to find it. If you can't find it, we're doing something wrong. Really, screenshot it and send it to me. I would love to know it.
Next
And
time.
in particular, if you could send me like the preceding query or 2, if that's okay, that will help us to debug it. Thanks.
Do you plan to add an automated training system that will teach your user how to ask the right question? Or a good way of learning this and that way of asking?
Well, automated, I don't know. We have advanced search, right? Which have you ever used advanced search? There's the button, it takes you to a new UI, which has almost all the options out there, and you can actually click and select, and it builds the query for you. Okay? So that's one thing. So we have that, but I know that there's a long story about it, but not as many people use it as I would like. A big part of my job right now is going around teaching this stuff. And an important part of that is trying to figure out how we can scale that, how we can get it up into the millions. So my objective with my boss for this year is to teach 1 million people. So I'll try to get to you. But I don't think we'll do totally automated ones, but we'll more like short videos, kind of like the Khan Academy kinds of things. Because I think those are really effective.
I think we have time for one more question.
Okay, one more.
So I was going to ask, so Google search is really well known.
Yeah.
So I was curious to ask, what percentage of people who use Google search do you think are aware of even 10% or 20% of the other services that Google offers?
It varies from service to service. So do you mean, for example, Gmail and SketchUp and Earth, or do you mean news and patents and images?
The whole spectrum. I mean, you named 3D model searching, and there's Google Voice, and a large number of products.
We have this immense array, even a flotilla of products, right? And I would say the spectrum is not well understood by people. It's partly for historical reasons, like how many people here actually know what ORCID is, right? Super well known in Brazil, super well known in India, not so much in the United States. It's a social networking platform. But that's a historically independent, it was positioned independent, aside from Google, independently to begin with. Probably not a great idea, but it was an experiment. Whether or not people know, for example, the advanced search operators, I know most people don't know those. And that's why we spend so much time trying to figure out how ranking and how to improve that. But in general, I would say the biggest issue that Google has is how to make people aware of the vast array of possibilities. And I don't think we do a particularly great job of that. That's something we really need to improve. Okay. Is that it?
Great. Well, I think there are lots more questions, but we have a little chance to, if someone would love to come up and talk with Dan, you're welcome to right afterward, but please join me in thanking him for a great job.